Okay, I'm gonna get started. It's Berkeley time. So, hey everyone, thanks for coming. Today's lecture 5, and today I'm going to talk about a little bit about some field methods, a basic guide to kind of the basics of some field methods. Kind of go over some principles of our field trip that's coming up on Saturday. And yeah, hopefully, I know a lot of people have midterms this week, so if people weren't able to come, or if you guys have to leave early, don't worry. Today is kind of a more chill class session, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to end a little bit early today, but we'll see how it goes. So, just to review last lecture, we had Alicia Powers come in as our guest lecturer. She was the head zookeeper of the California Trail section of Oakland Zoo. She talked about her journey from a student at Cal to being a head zookeeper at Oakland Zoo. She talked about how zoos have kind of changed their priorities from being a more entertainment institution to a conservation institution. She talked about her role as a zookeeper, what she kind of does daily, and their initiatives surrounding the California Condor Reintroduction Project, the American Bison Project, and the Mountain Lion Project as well. Just a reminder that if you guys want to do an internship with the Oakland Zoo, Alicia sent me the link to all their internship materials. So if you want any of those materials, or you can go to their website, and the summer internship applications are due on the 15th this month. So it's kind of a short deadline for that one coming up, but there's also during the year internships with them as well. I highly recommend. That's probably how I got the majority of my most interesting wildlife experience was through the Oakland Zoo. So just to reiterate about the field trip, if you guys haven't done the QR code yet, it's the confirmation code for the field trip, and I'd really appreciate if anybody who is going to go this Saturday fills that out. There's a waiver attached to it as well that I just need. We're kind of collaborating with CERC, the Environmental Resource Center, for resources with this trip and planning and everything. So the basic plan is over here. You can read it, but I'm also going to send an email about it too with more information. We're just going to meet at around 8:30 a.m. on the West Circle near the Social Sciences building. And we're going to divide up cars there and then head to Drake's Beach, where all the elephant seals are going to be, hopefully. I'm crossing my fingers you're there on a good day, but it looks like the weather's really good, so I'm super excited about that one. Yeah, and also if you guys are bringing friends on this trip that you put on the interest form as well, make sure they also fill out the waiver. It's really important for liability's sake, even though we don't really think there's going to be any risk. It's just good to have for safety. Moving on to the central question of today's lecture, we're going to be talking about how can field methods improve conservation efforts, and which methods are most effective for what. So some key points that we're going to cover throughout the lecture. We're going to talk about the most common field methods and kind of categorize it into 4 main categories. Then we're going to talk about applications and case studies. We're going to watch a couple videos on different ways that these field methods have been used. And then lastly, we're going to compare field methods, kind of discuss the pros and cons of the methods we learned about. So, moving on to some direct observation and survey field methods. Some of the ones that I was looking at and that are the most common with this type of category is visual counts. Line transects are basically if you say if you have a huge land trust that you're managing, line transects could be you categorizing a sect of that land that you're gonna focus your study within, just to have a kind of base for your observations that's a little bit more easy to manage. Then we also have behavioral/individual counts. An individual count example is I've heard some conservationists who are studying the diets of different animals. The example that I was thinking of is there was a scientist who was studying the diet of primates, and he kind of is a leader in the dietary field within zoos and captivity. So he went in the wild, went to the field and studied what primates eat what, and what is most beneficial for their dietary systems. And from there, he literally just watched monkeys all day for like 6 hours and wrote down everything that they ate, anything that they were snacking on, that they ate a lot of, different things like that. And then he used that data to help zoos across America kind of facilitate a better dietary plan for their captive primates specifically. So that's a really cool example of a visual account that can be applied to something really cool and real. Next, I had camera traps and remote sensing. This is a really common tactic for wildlife data analysis. Wildlife Insights, this bullet point right here, is a program that I specifically use for the California Wolf Project. We use Wildlife Insights, and it has all of their camera trap data across the entire state of California in one place, and it can basically put a little red box around any animal that's shown in the picture that the remote camera sensor picked up, and then we have the chance to identify it or correct Wildlife Insights' opinion on what the animal is in that photo. And then from there, we use that data to project a lot of different analyses on different movement data across California. So that's another cool way to survey a population. So some pros of these methods are that it's real-time, first-hand data. There's behavioral insights that you can gain from it, and it's pretty non-intrusive most of the time. And then some cons are obviously the time and monetary cost. It takes a lot of time to have a researcher go out there and just count individually what animals are eating what, or on the other hand of things, of analyzing all these camera trap pictures. It takes a lot of time, and the camera traps themselves can be a huge monetary cost to a project, especially with a low budget. It could be very hard to get. And then there could be some observer bias too. If you really want to be seeing this one animal that's super rare in a camera trap, you might be more biased to identify a blob on a screen as the animal that you're thinking of. So that is a possibility. And then detectability. So sometimes these animals might not be as clear as day to see in these traps, or even in a visual count. Maybe you'll miss something with the eye alone. So yeah, those are some pros and cons to some direct observation techniques. Then I wanted to also mention tracking and marking techniques. So tracking is basically using, now it's a lot of GPS tracking, but you can also use radio telemetry to track where animals are. And also marking, which is banding and tagging. That's really common in bird surveys, and is kind of being phased out right now with the tracking systems that are being more accessible to little tiny birds and not as intrusive. But still, a lot of the cons with these types of managing strategies is ethical and legal considerations, potential to stress and harm the animal, and they are also expensive and resource intensive. So, but on the other side, pros of these methods include they can be large-scale efforts, they're long-term monitoring opportunities, and they also improve species management techniques with the data that comes out of there, because especially if the species you're tracking are crossing national borders, it can be way more helpful to have science that proves that these animals are utilizing both countries and or lands that you might be having to work with in terms of having conversations about how to manage a species internationally. Then some non-invasive techniques are, and I think these are some of the most cool techniques that I'm going to be talking about. Bioacoustics is one that I know is being used a lot for whales right now in terms of decoding their communication. and I just like elaborated it as acoustic monitoring. So it's a huge new field with decoding communication between animals, and it's really interesting. If you want to learn more about it, there's a ton of articles about how they're thinking about whale communication now. And also some eDNA sampling, which is where you can analyze skin, feces, saliva, or urine and kind of determine the species. And if you do a little bit more DNA like tweaking, you can also potentially find the individual that you were looking for. This is mostly used for like animals who are very elusive and you might not be able to see it naturally in the wild very often. I know it's used for certain types of seals, but we're also going to watch a video on that one, so I won't yap about that one too much. But some pros of these non-invasive techniques is they're obviously non-invasive, they're high sensitivity, and they can help with monitoring elusive species and are usually cost-effective and efficient, depending on the bioacoustic method that you use. Sometimes they can be expensive too. But some cons are they can really only confirm presence and not real-time movement like the other methods would. And there's a lack of individual data most of the time, especially without the proper time and resources. You might not be able to ever identify a certain individual with these techniques. And there's also the risk of degradation or contamination. So if anything contaminates that eDNA sample that might be from a different species or a different animal, there could be potential for mess ups. So that's an interesting debate when we're talking about these newer non-invasive techniques. And then lastly, I wanted to go over some citizen science and community-based monitoring. You guys probably have heard of some of these, but I just wanted to mention that eBird is an app that helps you record bird sightings and contribute to scientific research. And also iNaturalist is one that I've been using for years, and it helps you identify plants and animals, and it also contributes to data. So I've been using iNaturalist for years, and whenever I want to like identify something in front of me, I always just use it, and they have like a automatic system that kind of identifies it for you. And if that's wrong, there's a lot of people on iNaturalist who are just observing different species for their scientific data, and if you marked it as a certain species, they might be able to correct it with more knowledge and say, oh, it's actually this species. So I think that's really interesting about iNaturalist. And some cons of using some of these public data resources is reliability and accuracy issues. Obviously, iNaturalist doesn't identify every single species correctly the first time around, so that might be an issue. But also, there's a huge legacy of injustice and social inequity that shape these data biases within iNat and eBird. I attended a PhD finishing talk by Cesar, and he is associated with the Shell Lab, and he basically had a whole wildlife seminar talk, which I don't know if you guys have heard of wildlife seminars within the UC Berkeley Wildlife program. They're usually hosted in Mulford 36, and it's like every other Friday, I think, at noon, and they're actually really, really interesting. So one of them was a finishing talk by Cesar, and he was talking about how legacies of redlining and other discriminatory practices still shape how much nature biodiversity are available to low-income and minority communities, and how they shape data biases in these public platforms like eBird and iNat. So this is really important when it comes to policy, like when we're talking about how much nature is in an area, how much biodiversity is in an area. If we're just using these two resources, we might think there's more biodiversity or threatened species in a certain area, when really we just don't have the data for the other areas, because there's less, I guess, availability of resources and natural spaces in those areas that we just don't have the data to identify those. But on the other side, there's also really good pros to using these techniques. It's cost effective for one, which a lot of these methods are not. It expands data collection efforts and enhances public engagement and awareness by a lot. So yeah, I wanted to present a few case studies on some of these wildlife techniques being used in research. So this person, I think, is a wildlife biologist who was just vlogging her experience of using camera traps. And I think it's a really interesting video because she kind of outlines exactly what she does. Here, let me readjust this. Okay, we're gonna watch a little bit of this.
Hello, my name is Danielle Gay. I'm a master's student at Texas State University. My research focuses on the occurrence of coyotes and gray foxes across the United States. I use camera traps, also known as game cameras, to study these species. In this video, I'd like to show you how I use camera traps for my research. My cameras are placed in several public city parks around Austin, Texas. The camera locations were chosen at random, and most of them are off-trail, which reduces bias in my sampling as well as the amount of human photos taken. To survey wildlife in Austin city parks, I set a camera to take photos for an entire month, 4 times per year, in January, April, July, and October. At the end of each sampling month, I remove the cameras and download the images to use for my research. Let me show you how a camera trap works. The camera is housed within this unit. The cameras are battery powered and store their images on an SD memory card. The unit contains a passive infrared sensor which detects heat and movement. When the sensor is triggered, say by an approaching animal, the camera takes a picture. Camera traps have many settings which allow them to take both photos and videos anytime the infrared sensor is triggered. My cameras are set to take just 1 photo every 30 seconds if triggered. Pictures have metadata that is stored with the photo, such as the time and date, moon phase, and temperature. To collect wildlife photos, I install a camera trap to a tree 1 meter off the ground or about knee height. It's important not to place the camera too high. This height gives a wide and close to the ground view of anything that passes the camera, which is necessary for most wildlife species. Even deer can be captured at this height. Sometimes animals get really close to the camera and you only see a part of their body in the frame. My cameras are placed inside a metal case and locked to the tree to avoid vandalism and theft. Once installed on the tree, I record the location, time, and date for my setup, and I'm good to go. I'll see this camera again in 1 month's time.
Okay, I'm gonna stop it there. I'm gonna also put this video on Bee Courses, just in case you wanna watch the full thing. She goes into how she identifies certain species within the database, which I think is really cool. I think a lot of people don't put this information out very often, so it's really interesting to see how those camera traps actually work and what they look like too. So, next I'm gonna do the second case study, which is for eDNA for monitoring of aquatic biodiversity.
How do you find one of the world's most endangered species when almost no one ever sees it? You use environmental or eDNA. Let's talk about some elusive genes in action. As animals move through their environment, they're constantly shedding off DNA through things like their hair, skin, nails, urine, feces, etc. One of the most elusive animals in the Mediterranean Sea is the monk seal, Monachus monacis. It's a great name. And even though people almost never get the chance to see it, they can find some of its DNA left behind. Scientists paired up with citizen volunteers to take 135 different water samples from around the Mediterranean. They extracted DNA from the samples and looked to see if any of it matched up with the monk seal. And in 57 samples, it did. This let them create a map of where the monk seals were distributed, something they would never have been able to do by eye, considering in one site, a monk seal had only been spotted 4 times since 2008. Environmental DNA studies like this can help us track the movement of endangered species and watch their population change over time. So which animal do you think we should use eDNA to find?
If you love to travel, capital.
Yeah, so that one was another cool one where I feel like it's a good example of how eDNA is being used. I had never heard of eDNA before around a month ago when I heard someone kind of speak about how they've been using eDNA on their conservation project. So for me, it's really interesting to learn about how non-invasive techniques are being used more often, because I think it's really valuable to learn about. So the third case study is going to be around GPS tracking for migratory bird conservation. This one doesn't have any audio, so you're just going to have to read along. I hope you guys can see it well.
A+.
Talking parrot. Okay, yeah, I thought that video was really cool. Even though it didn't have any audio, I thought it'd be worth it to show to you guys, because I think it's just a really cool example of how GPS trackers are being used, especially like their note about how some of them are as light as a raindrop. It really puts into context how improving technology is helping conservation movements be like more eco-friendly and non-invasive. So yeah, also.
In like the seal, the monk seal one, how can they like tell where the seals are when it's like they swim in the ocean waves go, and like doesn't it move the DNA all around? Like how is that like,
Yeah, the thing is, it's not a very precise measurement, but they count the location based off of where they found the eDNA and where they collected the eDNA. So sometimes it's through like certain types of netting that will hopefully catch some sort of like poop, or through other methods. I don't know exactly like what types of catching methods there are. I would be interested to see that, but they base it off of where they find the eDNA. But that's a good point. It's like there's a lot of like ocean currents that could have been like taking that completely elsewhere. But I think for a species that is so elusive like the monk seal, it's valuable just to even have the information that they were in the general area of this like bay or something. So I think there's progress to be made with that too, but I think there's data that can like help in general ways through that.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any thoughts on those videos or questions? Yeah.
I've heard that some animals are sensitive to human smell specifically. So I was wondering, especially the first video, I saw her using bare hands. Is there ever like an effect of like human skin making it so that the camera kind of smells to other animals and they tend to avoid that area because of that? Is there any situation like that?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there were a situation like that, but I think in general there are like so many smells, and even though her camera traps are off trail, I think the smell of a human like would also be wherever she walked, wherever she touched a tree, where I think that smell is just going to be around. I don't think it would be concentrated enough or like strong enough to deter any animal specifically, but that's just my ideas. I mean, like, I don't know, that it would be interesting to know if there was any like data around the effectiveness of that too, because there is a chance that also like a big block looking thing on a tree is gonna deter an animal from being in that area. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a note on that. I've used them quite a bit with deer, and they're way smarter than you think.
Yeah.
I've watched them like walk around the tree, like there's a clear trail, and they'll walk around your tree to avoid going in front of the camera. So they're definitely smarter than you think, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that has to do with scent, but also like they just see something they haven't seen before, and they're like, I have one picture of a deer just like looking at the camera, and then he never came back by, and then I went and sat and watched, and every time he'd come by, he'd go around it and then keep going. So
yeah, I've noticed.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I've noticed that too a little bit for the California Wolf Project, is that I once had a picture of a deer like sniffing the camera and just like it takes like three pictures every second with the, like, when it's triggered, and it was just like immediately ran away thinking it was like something that could be potentially like, it's just a foreign object and they're not comfortable with it. So yeah, that's a good point.
They also make like a little bit of noise, so most of them. Like
Yeah, they
very
click a little bit.
Very, like a very small click,
Yeah,
and I think they can pick up on that.
yeah, that's a good point. Anybody else? Okay, yeah. So moving on to this slide, I was gonna talk about some paradigms with effectiveness in terms of these methods. So some factors in affecting the effectiveness of all the things that we've been talking about is the type of species that you're studying, the habitat you're in, and the research goals. Because not every research project needs a camera trap, not every research project wants to use bio or acoustic monitoring techniques. So it all depends on what your goals are and where you're at and what species you're looking for that determine what kind of things you're looking for. And some trade-offs with some of these methods include cost versus accuracy. We talked about that a lot versus like with the pros and cons of different techniques. It's like maybe one method costs a lot but is really accurate, or one method doesn't cost anything, is free, a public resource, but the accuracy is off a lot of the time. So that's a huge trade-off with the effectiveness of different methods. But also the invasiveness versus reliability standpoint is maybe some methods are more invasive than others, but those invasive methods are more reliable than a non-invasive method thus far. So those are just some trade-offs that I feel like add to the complexity of choosing a field method to use for data collection, which I think are really interesting to kind of play off of, because those trade-offs kind of relate to a lot of different things within conservation. It's a reoccurring theme, I think, with a lot of what we're talking about in this class. So next I wanted to do a little discussion with which methods you guys think are going to be appropriate for different conservation scenarios. This discussion is pretty like informal. You guys get to choose which questions you want to answer, which questions you don't want to answer, who your group members are. No stress, and there's no right answer necessarily either. It's just bouncing off ideas. Maybe you have heard a technique that I haven't mentioned in this class and want to mention it to people. So yeah, I'll give you guys like 2-3 minutes to talk about it. Yeah.
But it's a bit hard to record that because in order to do that, you have to depressurize the animal as you bring it up from the depth. But that's not only pretty expensive, but you might kill the animal in the process. So for deep sea animals, it's a lot more difficult because, like they said before, like they say in general, that we haven't explored oceans as much as we did in space.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, for deep sea animals, we're kind of just innovation is more needed for that one. But for most cases, it's usually just find a live species and record it for the most part.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like I used to do so much more research on like deep sea animals because I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and like it is. It's just like so understudied, and there's some really interesting challenges with that too, especially with the blobfish. I remember like all those pictures went viral of like, you know, blobfish, how ugly it is and everything, but in reality they don't look like that in like their natural environment. So it is really fun to think about that, and yeah, it definitely contributes to the challenges of different field techniques. Anybody else? Any ideas? Yeah.
We talked about how you can kind of combine them too to kind of localize. So we were talking about you could use maybe the eDNA to find the region they're living, and then if you want to study their behavior more, you can put a camera trap out to follow them along.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, like techniques was meant to kind of say that too, is like you can always use multiple, and it's probably better in a lot of situations to use multiple just as a backup, or collecting different data that can be used for different projects too. On a big project like California Wolf Project, I use it I use this as an example every single time, but I just feel like there's so much opportunity for different individual research projects within such a huge statewide initiative like that. So when we analyze camera trap data, we're not only looking for wolves, we're looking for the squirrels, we're looking for the foxes, we're looking for everything. And like everything has value because who knows who's going to use this data in the future and for what purpose. So that's also another angle of things. Anybody else? Okay, I think I'm going to move on. So I just wanted to cover some future trends in field methods. I heard some people talk about AI data collection. There's a huge growing field with AI. Obviously, we know that it's a all-dominating field right now. And so AI data collection methods are helping identify individuals within species and organizing like massive data collections that would take a poor unpaid intern like 10 hours or like 100 hours to complete. So there's pros and cons with that collection method. So yeah, but it's a very emerging field within conservation data and every field imaginable. And then also drones in the field. We're gonna have a talk from a Point Blue executive that is coming back from Antarctica like this week, I believe. And he's gonna talk about how they use a lot of drones to monitor the populations of penguins and kind of use that data in combination with other geospatial data to analyze the effects of climate change on Adeline penguin populations. So that's going to be a really, really cool talk in the next few weeks. And yeah, that's a huge new emerging trend in field methods that is actually quite complicated in terms of permits and legislation now because it's such a new way to monitor populations. And lastly, I put local community engagement. I think there's a growing movement to incorporate local communities and perspectives in data surveys, especially on the international level. If you're an international researcher, it's really important that you're always working with the local community and local stakeholders and leaders in an area that you may be studying, which I feel like in the past hasn't always been utilized as a resource. So that's a huge movement. It's been a movement for a long time, but I think it's even more fleshed out in terms of future data analysis techniques. So I'm gonna wrap up a little early today. I feel like a lot of us, again, I said at the beginning of lecture, like we have a lot of midterms coming up and it's also a really busy week for everybody. So just some key takeaways that we talked about are field methods can improve conservation efforts by enabling scientists to monitor biodiversity, detect environmental changes, and develop strategies that support ecosystem resilience and sustainability. Number 2, we talked about common field methods such as camera traps, GPS tracking, eDNA sampling, and citizen science, and they each have their own unique uses that may not fit every single project. Then lastly, we also talked about technologies and strategies for data collection and how they're always evolving and improving. So yeah, thank you guys so much for showing up today. This is the attendance code, a little early today. Animal of the week is California condor. And yeah, hopefully I get to see you, most of you guys on Saturday. I'm so excited to go to Point Reyes and hopefully we see some amazing wildlife. It's gonna be a really, really cool trip, so I'm glad. Yeah.
I saw the plan earlier for the field trip.
Uh-huh.
Is there any section for like the elk?
I really want to be able to see elk. I've been talking to Cirque about how we're gonna manage our time because we gotta be back here by 5 p.m. So hopefully we see them on the way. And I wanted to go to Tamales Point, which is like the most famous place apparently in Point Reyes to find elk, but it would add like another like 3 hours to our trip in total with transit time, so it's really hard to fit everything, but
okay, yeah.
Hopefully we'll see some on the way. I'm hoping, but yeah. Thank you guys.